What is it? Are you all right?
I can't believe this. He left everything to me.
I stopped expecting my daughter to answer my calls after the 7th month of silence. Lauren Mitchell, my only child, ignored every voicemail, every birthday card, every desperate message I left. When Christmas came and went without a single word from her, I finally told myself the painful truth: maybe my daughter no longer wanted me in her life. Then an inheritance meeting invitation was mailed out. 3 hours later, my phone rang. For the first time in months, Lauren's name appeared on my screen. And as I stared at it, shaking, I realized something that hurt even more than being abandoned. My daughter hadn't forgotten how to reach me. She had simply chosen not to. If you've ever experienced heartbreak from someone you love, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Before we begin, please take a moment to like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if your own child suddenly returned after months of silence? Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I'd truly love to read your stories. My name is Vicki Walters, and until 2 years ago, I believed I had everything that truly mattered. Not wealth, not status, not a beautiful house, family. That was always enough for me. I lived in Columbus, Ohio, in the same brick house where my husband Robert and I had raised our only child, Lauren Mitchell. The maple tree in the front yard was still there. The wooden swing Robert built when Lauren was 7 still hung from one of its branches, though it had long since stopped being used. Some mornings, I would sit by the kitchen window with my coffee and watch the sunlight hit that old swing. And I would remember a little girl with golden brown hair running through the yard barefoot, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. That little girl had once been my whole world, and I had been hers. When people hear stories like mine, they often assume the relationship between a mother and daughter was always complicated. It wasn't. Lauren and I were incredibly close, especially after she became a teenager. While many mothers and daughters fought constantly, Lauren would come into my bedroom late at night and sit on the edge of my bed just to talk. We talked about school, about boys, about college, about dreams, about fears, about everything. Robert used to joke that the two of us could carry on a conversation for 3 straight days if nobody stopped us. And honestly, he wasn't wrong. Lauren trusted me. I trusted her. There was never a secret between us. At least, that's what I thought. The day Lauren graduated from Ohio State University was one of the proudest days of my life. Robert cried more than I did, though he would never admit it. He kept pretending he had dust in his eyes while taking photographs. Lauren earned a degree in marketing and quickly found a good job with a growing company in Columbus. She was smart, independent, kind. The type of woman who always helped others before helping herself. Robert used to tell everyone the same thing: that girl is going to do something special with her life. And for a long time, it looked like he was right. Then she met Jason Mitchell. At first, there was nothing alarming about him. Jason was handsome, confident, successful. He worked in financial consulting and always seemed to know exactly what to say. The first time Lauren brought him home, Robert and I tried our best to welcome him. He arrived carrying flowers for me and a bottle of bourbon for Robert. Polite, respectful, charming. almost too charming. Looking back now, I remember something that bothered Robert that evening. Nothing obvious, just a feeling. After Jason left, Robert stood at the kitchen sink, staring out the window. I asked what was wrong. He shrugged. Probably nothing. What? I don't know. Vic? I laughed. That's not an answer. Robert sighed. Sometimes people spend so much energy making you like them that you never get to see who they really are. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Lauren was happy. That was all I cared about. A year later, they were married. The wedding was beautiful. Perfect weather, perfect venue, perfect photographs. I remember standing beside Robert as Lauren danced with Jason during the reception. She looked happier than I had ever seen her, and I remember whispering to my husband, "We did okay, didn't we?" Robert squeezed my hand. We did. Neither of us knew how much was about to change. The first year of their marriage seemed normal. Lauren still called me several times a week. We met for lunch. We went shopping together. Sometimes she stopped by after work just to talk. Then little things started changing. At first, the changes were so small that I barely noticed them. Instead of calling 3 times a week, she called once, then every other week, then maybe once a month. Whenever I asked if everything was okay, she always had a reasonable explanation. Work was busy. Jason was busy. Life was busy. And honestly, I understood. I remembered what it was like to be newly married. People build their own lives. That's normal. That's healthy. So I told myself not to worry. But Robert noticed it too. One evening, about 6 months before he got sick, we were sitting on the back porch. Lauren had canceled dinner with us for the 3rd time in a row. Robert stared at his untouched plate. Something feels off. I sighed. She's just busy. Maybe, but his expression said otherwise. Robert rarely worried about things. That was my job. He was the calm one, the steady one, which was exactly why his concern bothered me. Then came the hardest year of my life. Robert was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis felt like a bomb exploding in the center of our family. One moment, we were planning a vacation. The next, we were sitting in a doctor's office discussing treatment options. Lauren was devastated. At least in the beginning. She came to appointments. She visited often. She cried with me. But as the months passed, something changed again. The visits became less frequent. The calls became shorter. The excuses became more common. Jason always seemed to be the reason. They were traveling. They were busy. They had obligations. They couldn't make it. I tried not to judge. People handle grief differently. That was what I told myself. Then Robert passed away, and my world became unbearably quiet. 40 years. That's how long we had been married. 40 years of shared mornings, shared meals, shared dreams. Then suddenly, I was sleeping alone, eating alone, waking up alone. The silence in the house became almost physical, like another person living there. For a while, Lauren was my lifeline. She called often after the funeral. She checked on me. She encouraged me to stay active. And I believed maybe our family would survive the loss. Maybe we would heal together. But instead, the distance grew larger, month by month. call by call, visit by visit, until eventually it felt as though I was watching my daughter disappear in slow motion. The hardest part wasn't the silence itself. It was not understanding why. There had been no argument, no betrayal, no family drama, nothing. One day, we were close. The next, she seemed to be slipping away from me. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't figure out what had changed. Sometimes late at night, I would replay every conversation we'd ever had, every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering, looking for a mistake, something I had done wrong, something that might explain why my daughter was drifting further away. But I never found an answer, only questions. Questions that became even more painful after Robert was gone. Because there was one thing I never told Lauren. In the final weeks of his life, Robert had said something strange, something that didn't make sense at the time, something I wouldn't fully understand until much later. Lying in his hospital bed, holding my hand, he looked directly at me and said, "Keep an eye on Lauren." I frowned. "Why?" Robert hesitated. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to say more. Then he simply shook his head. "Just promise me." I promised. At the time, I thought it was a dying father's worry. Nothing more. I had no idea those would become some of the most important words Robert Walters would ever speak. The silence didn't happen all at once. If it had, maybe I would have fought harder. Maybe I would have demanded answers sooner. Maybe I would have driven straight to Lauren's house and refused to leave until she looked me in the eye. But silence is strange. When it arrives slowly, you spend months convincing yourself everything is normal. At first, I told myself Lauren was busy. Then I told myself she was stressed. Then I told myself she was grieving Robert in her own way. The excuses came easily because the alternative was too painful to consider. The alternative was that my daughter was choosing a life without me. About 3 months after Robert's death, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. I was always the one initiating contact. Always. Every phone call, every text message, every invitation. If I didn't reach out first, days would pass. Then weeks. Then longer. One Sunday afternoon, I decided to test it. I wouldn't call. I wouldn't text. I wouldn't send anything. I told myself Lauren would contact me when she had time. I lasted 11 days. 11 miserable days. I remember staring at my phone every morning, checking it before breakfast, checking it after lunch, checking it before bed. Nothing. No call. No text. No email. Nothing from my only child. Finally, on the 11th day, I called her. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. "Hi, sweetheart," I said after the beep. "It's Mom. Just checking in. Give me a call when you can." My voice sounded cheerful, but the second the call ended, I sat at my kitchen table and cried. Not because she didn't answer, because I knew I had expected her not to. That realization hurt. Over the next several months, the pattern continued. I would call, no answer. I would text, no response. Sometimes I left cheerful messages, sometimes concerned messages. Sometimes messages pretending everything was perfectly fine. Just wanted to hear your voice. Hope you're having a good week. Love you. Simple things, mother things, most went unanswered. Still, I refused to give up. When Lauren's birthday arrived, I mailed a handwritten card. I spent nearly an hour writing it. I told her how proud I was of her, how much I loved her, how much her father had loved her. I slipped a photograph inside. A picture of Lauren sitting on Robert's shoulders at the county fair when she was 8 years old. One of our favorite memories. I waited for a phone call, a text, anything. Nothing came. Not even a thank you. I tried to convince myself she never received it. But deep down, I knew better. Thanksgiving was worse. That holiday had always belonged to our family. Every year, Robert carved the turkey. Every year, Lauren helped me make pumpkin pie. Every year, we sat around the same dining table telling the same stories. The year after Robert died was supposed to be different, smaller, sadder. But I still expected Lauren to come. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I called. No answer. I texted. No answer. I emailed. No answer. Finally, 3 days before the holiday, I received a brief text message. Sorry, we already have plans. That was it. 7 words. No apology. No explanation. No suggestion of another day. Nothing. I stared at the message for several minutes. Then I read it again and again. Something felt wrong. Not the content, the wording. Lauren had always been warm, even in text messages. She used exclamation points, heart emojis, little jokes. This message felt cold, mechanical, like it had been written by someone who wanted the conversation to end as quickly as possible. I tried calling immediately, straight to voicemail. Thanksgiving arrived. For the first time in my life, I ate dinner alone. I still cooked too much food. Old habits die hard. Halfway through the meal, I found myself setting aside leftovers for Lauren before remembering she wasn't coming. I broke down crying right there at the table. The chair where Robert used to sit was empty. Lauren's chair was empty. The house felt enormous, and I felt invisible. Christmas wasn't any better. Actually, it was worse. Christmas had always been Robert's favorite holiday. The decorations, the music, the lights. He loved all of it. That December, I decorated the house anyway. Not because I wanted to, because I couldn't bear not to. I mailed gifts to Lauren and Jason, carefully wrapped, carefully chosen. The tracking information confirmed they had been delivered. No acknowledgement ever came. Christmas morning arrived. No phone call. No video call. No message. Nothing. That was the day something inside me started to break. I sat in front of the Christmas tree staring at my phone for nearly an hour. Waiting. Hoping. Praying. Nothing happened. Late that evening, I finally sent a text. Merry Christmas. Sweetheart, I love you. A response arrived almost instantly. For a brief moment, my heart soared. Then I read it. Merry Christmas. Busy today. That was all. 3 words after the greeting. Busy today. I can't explain why those words haunted me. Maybe because they felt so unlike Lauren. Maybe because they felt empty. Maybe because they felt forced. I read them over and over. Something wasn't right. I couldn't prove it. I couldn't explain it, but I felt it. The daughter I knew wasn't present in those messages. Weeks passed, then months. My sleep became terrible. I started waking up at 3 a.m, unable to fall back asleep. My mind constantly replayed memories, searching for answers, searching for mistakes, searching for reasons. Sometimes I wondered if I had failed as a mother. Maybe I had been too protective. Maybe I had been too involved. Maybe I had done something years ago that she never forgave. The uncertainty was torture. One rainy evening in March, I was looking through old family photographs when my phone buzzed. A text from Lauren. The first message she had initiated in nearly 4 months. My hands trembled as I opened it. Hope you're doing okay. That was it. No explanation. No conversation. No follow-up. Just one sentence. But something immediately caught my attention. The wording. Again. Lauren never wrote like that. Never. For years. Her messages had been full of personality. This felt sterile, distant, almost professional. I replied immediately. I'm okay. Miss you? Want to talk? The typing indicator appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again, then disappeared. Finally, a message arrived. Maybe another time. And then nothing. No response after that. No matter how many times I replayed the exchange. One thought kept returning. It didn't sound like my daughter. It sounded like someone pretending to be my daughter. The idea seemed ridiculous, paranoid, even absurd. Yet I couldn't shake it, because deep in my heart, I knew Lauren. I knew her voice. I knew her personality. I knew her warmth. And the woman behind those messages felt like a stranger. That night, lying awake in bed, I remembered something else. The final conversation with Robert. His weak voice. His worried eyes. The promise I had made. Keep an eye on Lauren. For the first time, I started wondering whether Robert had seen something I hadn't. And for the first time, a frightening possibility entered my mind. What if Lauren wasn't simply ignoring me? What if something was very wrong? Once the possibility entered my mind, I couldn't get rid of it. What if Lauren wasn't simply avoiding me? What if something was happening behind the scenes? At first, I hated myself for even thinking it. Maybe I was becoming one of those mothers who refused to accept that their children had grown up and moved on. Maybe I was inventing problems because loneliness had made me desperate, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Every instinct I had as a mother kept whispering the same thing. Something is wrong. I decided to start paying closer attention. Not spying. Not interfering. Just looking for answers. The first thing I did was call my sister, Diane. Lauren had always been close to her aunt. If Lauren wasn't talking to me, maybe she was still talking to Diane. When Diane answered, I immediately heard concern in her voice. Vicki, is everything okay? I hesitated. Have you heard from Lauren lately? There was a brief pause. Not really. My stomach tightened. What does that mean? I got a Christmas card. That's it. That's it. I stared out the kitchen window. Diane. She doesn't call. No. Text? No. Visit? No. Another pause. Then Diane said something that made my chest tighten. I actually thought she was avoiding me too. That conversation was the first crack in the wall. Until then, I had assumed Lauren was only pulling away from me. Now I realized the distance extended beyond our relationship. Over the next week, I quietly contacted several relatives. A cousin, an uncle, 2 longtime family friends. The answers were almost identical. Nobody had heard much from Lauren. Nobody had seen her recently. Nobody knew why. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Lauren wasn't disconnecting from one person. She was disconnecting from everyone, and that frightened me. The Lauren I knew loved family. She remembered birthdays. She sent thank you cards. She checked on people when they were sick. She wasn't the type to disappear. One evening, I opened Facebook and searched her profile. The results surprised me, or rather, the lack of results did. Lauren had always been moderately active online. Photos, vacation pictures, holiday gatherings, little updates about life, nothing excessive, just normal. But now her profile looked abandoned. The most recent post was nearly a year old. No new photos, no updates, nothing. Jason's profile wasn't much different. In fact, it was oddly empty, almost curated, as if someone had intentionally removed any glimpse into their real lives. The more I looked, the more uncomfortable I became. A few days later, I called Lauren's former workplace. I wasn't expecting much. I simply wanted to know whether she was still there. The receptionist politely informed me that Lauren no longer worked for the company. I nearly dropped the phone. What do you mean she doesn't work there? I'm sorry, ma'am. Lauren left about 8 months ago. 8 months? 8 months. I sat frozen after hanging up. Lauren had never mentioned quitting. Not once. Years earlier, she had loved that job. She had worked hard for that position. She had celebrated promotions. She had talked about her projects constantly. Why would she leave without telling me? And what was she doing now that night? I barely slept. Questions kept multiplying. Had Jason convinced her to quit? Had she found another job? Was she working at all? Why was every answer leading to more confusion the following weekend? I found myself driving through Lauren's old neighborhood. I told myself it was accidental, a harmless detour. The truth was, I missed her. Sometimes just being near places she frequented made me feel closer to her. As I passed a familiar row of houses, I noticed a woman gardening in a front yard. I recognized her immediately. Nancy Brooks. She had lived next door to Lauren for years before moving a few streets away. Nancy and Lauren had always gotten along well. Impulsively, I pulled over. Nancy looked up and smiled when she recognized me. Vicki. She walked over and hugged me. For a few minutes, we exchanged small talk. Then I asked the question that had become impossible to avoid. Have you seen Lauren lately? Nancy's smile faded slightly. Not recently. My heart sank. Then she hesitated. A long hesitation. The kind people make when they're deciding whether to say something uncomfortable. Nancy, she looked away. I don't know if I should mention this. The knot in my stomach tightened instantly. Please. Nancy set down her gardening gloves. It was several months ago. I saw Lauren. I waited. She was sitting in her car outside the house. Something in Nancy's tone made my pulse quicken. Okay. She looked upset. Upset how? Nancy frowned, searching for the right words. Crying. I felt a chill run through me. Crying. Nancy nodded. Not just upset. Vicki. Really crying. For a moment. Neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question that immediately came to mind. Did you talk to her? I tried. My heart jumped. You did. Nancy nodded slowly. I walked toward the car. What happened? Lauren saw me. And she wiped her face immediately. A terrible feeling settled in my chest. Then what? Nancy looked uncomfortable. She seemed nervous. Nervous. Like she didn't want anyone seeing her. I could barely breathe. What happened after that? Nancy pointed toward the street. Another vehicle pulled into the driveway. I knew the answer before she said it. Jason. Nancy nodded. The second she saw that car, she started the engine. My throat tightened. And then she drove away. Without talking to you. Without saying a word. For several seconds, I simply stared at her. The image formed instantly in my mind. My daughter sitting alone in a car, crying, afraid, watching for someone, watching for Jason. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't convince myself that was normal. Nancy seemed to sense what I was thinking. Maybe it was nothing, but her voice lacked conviction. I forced a smile. Maybe. Yet deep inside, I knew I didn't believe it. As I drove home that afternoon, Robert's final warning echoed through my head. Keep an eye on Lauren. Keep an eye on Lauren. Keep an eye on Lauren. The words felt different now. He hadn't sounded worried about her happiness. He had sounded worried about her safety. For the first time, I began wondering whether Robert had noticed something in Jason long before the rest of us. Maybe something subtle. Maybe something hidden. Maybe something dangerous. That evening, I opened an old photo album. I found a picture taken during Lauren and Jason's first year of marriage. The four of us were standing together at a 4th of July barbecue. At first glance, everything looked normal. Smiles, sunshine, family. Then I noticed something strange. Lauren was smiling, but her eyes weren't. I stared at the photograph for several minutes. The longer I looked, the more uneasy I became. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe grief was clouding my judgment. Or maybe I had ignored warning signs because I wanted to believe my daughter was happy. As midnight approached, I sat alone in my living room. The house was silent. The same silence that had become my constant companion. But now it felt different, heavier, more threatening. because for the first time, I wasn't afraid that Lauren no longer loved me. I was afraid she might need me, and that I might already be too late. For almost 2 weeks after speaking with Nancy Brooks, I did nothing. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside. Inside, however, I was fighting a war. Every day I debated with myself. Part of me wanted to believe everything was fine. Part of me wanted to drive straight to Lauren's house and demand answers. I kept hearing Robert's voice in my head. Keep an eye on Lauren. But what exactly was I supposed to do? Lauren was 38 years old. She wasn't a child. She had every right to live her own life. And yet, no matter how many times I tried to dismiss my fears, they returned stronger. I couldn't forget Nancy's story. I couldn't forget the strange text messages. I couldn't forget how isolated Lauren had become. Most of all, I couldn't forget the image of my daughter crying alone in her car. One Saturday morning, I finally made a decision. I was going to see her. Not call, not text, not email. See her, face to face. If Lauren truly wanted nothing to do with me, I would accept it, but I needed to hear those words from her. Not from Jason, not through a text message, not through silence, from Lauren herself. The drive to their house took about 45 minutes. Every mile felt longer than the last. By the time I pulled into their neighborhood, my hands were shaking. I almost turned around twice. The neighborhood was beautiful. Large homes, manicured lawns, quiet streets, the kind of place people dreamed of living. Jason had always been proud of that house. I remembered him showing it off when they first bought it. Now, as I pulled into the driveway, I felt nothing but dread. Several vehicles were parked outside. One of them belonged to Jason. My heart pounded. Lauren was probably home. I sat in my car for almost a full minute before forcing myself to get out. The air felt unusually cold despite the spring sunshine. I walked up the front path, knocked once, waited. Nothing. I knocked again, a little harder. This time, I heard movement inside. Footsteps. My pulse quickened. The door opened. Jason stood there. His expression changed instantly when he saw me. Not surprise, not happiness, annoyance. A brief flash of irritation crossed his face before being replaced by an artificial smile. Vicki, his voice sounded forced. Jason. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he stepped halfway into the doorway, blocking the entrance. A small gesture, but impossible to miss. I wasn't expecting company. I wanted to see Lauren. The smile vanished. She's busy. I looked past him. The house appeared quiet. Can I speak with her? Jason folded his arms. Not today. The answer came too quickly, too automatically. My stomach tightened. Can you tell her I'm here? His jaw shifted slightly. The first sign of irritation. Like I said, she's busy. I felt anger beginning to rise. Months of confusion. Months of silence. Months of unanswered questions. All concentrated into that single moment. Jason? I drove 45 minutes to see my daughter. She doesn't want visitors. The words hit me like a slap. She told you that? Yes. I stared at him. Something about his response felt rehearsed, as though he had delivered it before, maybe many times. I took a step forward. I'd like to hear that from Lauren. His expression hardened. You need to respect her boundaries. The phrase sounded strange coming from him. Clinical, carefully chosen, almost as though he had practiced it. I looked directly into his eyes. Is she even here? A brief pause, too brief for most people to notice. But I noticed. Of course she is. Then let me talk to her. No. The answer was immediate, final, cold. The tension between us thickened. I suddenly understood why Robert had never fully trusted him. Jason wasn't losing his temper. He wasn't yelling. In some ways, that made the situation more unsettling. Everything about him felt controlled, calculated, as if every word had been chosen in advance. Jason, I said quietly, I'm her mother, and she's an adult. I know that. Then act like it. The words landed hard. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question that had haunted me for months. Why has she stopped talking to everyone? A flicker crossed his face. Gone almost immediately. But I saw it. A crack. Just for a second. I don't know what you mean. She doesn't call her aunt. People get busy. She doesn't call her cousins. People move on. She barely talks to anyone. Jason's expression became icy. Maybe she's tired of being pressured. The accusation stunned me. Pressured. You call constantly. I stared at him in disbelief. I call because she's my daughter. And maybe that's the problem. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The cruelty of the statement wasn't what hurt most. It was the certainty with which he delivered it, as though he genuinely wanted me to believe I was the problem, as though months of silence could somehow be blamed on a mother who simply loved her child. Something felt deeply wrong, dangerously wrong. Then it happened. A movement upstairs. Tiny. Almost invisible. My eyes shifted instinctively toward the second floor. One of the curtains moved. Just slightly. A fraction of an inch. But enough. My breath caught. Someone was standing behind that window. Watching. I couldn't see a face. Only a shadow. A shape. But every instinct in my body screamed the same thing. Lauren. Lauren! I shouted suddenly. Jason immediately stepped farther into the doorway, blocking my view completely. That's enough. Lauren! I called again. No response. No movement. Nothing. But I knew what I had seen. I knew it. She heard me. Jason's face darkened. You need to leave. I saw someone at the window. Leave. I know she's here. Leave. For the first time, genuine hostility entered his voice. The polite mask was slipping. The charming son-in-law was disappearing, and what remained beneath made me uneasy. I took a slow step backward. Not because I was intimidated, because I suddenly realized I wasn't helping Lauren by creating a scene. If she was in trouble, confrontation wasn't the answer. Not yet. Jason continued watching me. Waiting. I looked at him one final time. Then I said something that surprised even me. If Lauren doesn't want me in her life, I'll accept that. He said nothing. But until I hear it from her directly, I won't stop trying. For a brief moment, something flashed across his face. Not anger, not annoyance, fear. It vanished almost instantly. But I saw it, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I turned and walked back toward my car. Every step felt heavy, painful, humiliating. I had driven all that way hoping to see my daughter. Instead, I had been treated like a stranger, worse than a stranger. Yet as I reached my vehicle, I looked back one last time. The curtain upstairs moved again, just barely. A shadow, a figure, watching, then gone. I sat behind the steering wheel, staring at the house. My heart was breaking. But another emotion had begun replacing the heartbreak. Determination. Because, for the first time, I no longer believed Lauren was simply ignoring me. Something was happening inside that house. Something she wasn't saying. Something Jason didn't want me to see. And as I drove away, I made a silent promise to myself. I was done accepting excuses. I was done accepting silence. Whatever truth was hiding behind that front door, I was going to find it. No matter how painful it turned out to be. The Monday after my visit to Lauren's house, I woke up exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. I had spent most of the night replaying every second of that confrontation with Jason. His answers, his expressions, the way he blocked the doorway, the fear I thought I had seen when I told him I wouldn't stop trying. Most of all, I couldn't stop thinking about the figure behind the upstairs curtain. If that had been Lauren and I believed with all my heart that it was, then why hadn't she come downstairs? Why hadn't she spoken? Why hadn't she simply opened the door and told me herself to leave her alone? The questions followed me through breakfast, through lunch, through the entire day. By Tuesday morning, I realized I needed help. Not from the police. Not yet. I didn't have any proof that something was wrong. Only instincts. And instincts aren't evidence. There was only one person I trusted enough to discuss everything with. Harold Peterson. Robert's attorney. Our family attorney for nearly 25 years. Harold wasn't just a lawyer. He had been one of Robert's closest friends. He attended family cookouts, holiday dinners, Lauren's graduation party. When Robert became ill, Harold was one of the few people who visited regularly. If anyone might know something I didn't, it was him. I called his office and scheduled an appointment. The next afternoon, I drove downtown. Harold's office occupied the third floor of an old brick building overlooking the Scioto River. The place hadn't changed in years. The same polished wooden furniture, the same framed photographs, the same smell of old books and coffee. When Harold entered the conference room, he immediately noticed something was wrong. "Vicki." His smile faded. "You look tired." I laughed softly. Tired would be an improvement. He sat down across from me. "What's happened?" For the next 30 minutes, I told him everything. Lauren's silence, The strange messages. The isolation. Nancy's story. The visit to the house. Jason blocking the door. The moving curtain. Harold listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. For several seconds, he said nothing. That silence worried me. Harold, he sighed. There may be something you should know. My stomach tightened instantly. What? He hesitated. The same way Nancy had hesitated. The same way Robert had hesitated during his final weeks. Suddenly, I hated hesitation. It always seemed to precede bad news. Harold. He looked directly at me. Robert had concerns about Jason. The room felt smaller. What kind of concerns? I don't know if concerns is the right word. What is the right word? Harold paused. Suspicions. A chill ran through me. I remembered conversations from years ago. Robert's occasional discomfort. His vague comments. His instincts. At the time, I had dismissed them. Now I wasn't so sure. What did Robert suspect? Harold stood and walked toward a filing cabinet. He unlocked a drawer, removed a folder, then returned to the table. The folder looked familiar. Robert's estate documents. Harold placed it carefully between us. About 6 months before he died, Robert requested changes to his estate plan. I frowned. I knew he updated the will. You knew he updated it. Harold nodded. You don't know why. My heartbeat quickened. What are you talking about? Harold opened the folder. Inside were documents I had never seen before. Legal paperwork. Notes. Signed amendments. Robert's signature appeared repeatedly. Before making these changes, Robert spent several weeks asking questions. Questions about what? Jason. I felt my pulse hammering. What kind of questions? Financial questions. I stared at him. Harold continued. Jason worked in financial consulting. Yes. He was knowledgeable about investments. Yes. He also showed unusual interest in Lauren's future inheritance. A cold sensation spread through my chest. I remembered family dinners, conversations about retirement, discussions about finances. At the time, Jason had seemed merely curious. Now those memories looked different, much different. What exactly did Robert notice? Harold adjusted his glasses. Nothing criminal. I exhaled slightly. Then he continued. At least, nothing he could prove. The relief disappeared immediately. He felt Jason talked about money constantly. I thought about that and realized it was true. Jason always seemed interested in assets, properties, investments, trust funds, inheritance planning. At the time, I had assumed it was professional habit. Now I wasn't certain. Harold continued. One conversation especially bothered Robert. What conversation? It happened about a year before his diagnosis. Harold opened another section of the file. There was a family barbecue? I remembered it vaguely. Summer. Backyard. Friends and relatives. What happened? Jason asked detailed questions about your estate. My stomach tightened. Lots of people ask those questions. Nah, not like Jason did. Harold's voice was calm, measured, professional, which somehow made it more unsettling. He wanted estimates, property values. I felt a chill. Investment accounts. Another chill. Insurance policies. I stared at Harold. He asked all that. According to Robert. Yes. I tried remembering. Pieces of old conversations floated through my mind. Fragments. Nothing clear. Nothing complete. But enough to make me uncomfortable. Robert never told me. He wasn't certain. Certain of what? Harold met my eyes. Whether Jason was simply curious, or whether he viewed family relationships as financial opportunities. The words landed heavily. For several moments, I couldn't speak. Then I asked the question forming in my mind. Is that why Robert changed the estate? Harold nodded slowly. Partly. There was more. I gripped the edge of the table. What more? Harold opened the final section of the folder. Several pages remained. Documents I had never seen before. One page bore Robert's handwritten notes. His handwriting immediately brought tears to my eyes. I hadn't seen it in so long. Harold carefully slid the page toward me. I read several lines, then froze. One sentence had been underlined twice. If Lauren ever appears unable to act independently, additional protections must remain in place. My heart nearly stopped. I looked up. What does this mean? Harold's expression softened. It means Robert wanted safeguards. Against Jason. Against anyone. But we both knew who Robert had been worried about. I looked back down at the page, unable to believe what I was reading. Robert had anticipated something. Not exactly, but enough to worry him. Enough to prepare. Enough to leave instructions. My voice trembled. What protections? Harold closed the folder. Then he said the words that changed everything. The inheritance isn't being distributed the way you think. I stared at him. What? The estate contains a special trust. A trust. I had heard the term before, but never paid much attention. Why? Because Robert specifically requested it. The room seemed to grow silent. What does it do? Harold folded his hands. The trust contains strict conditions. What conditions? For the first time during our meeting, Harold looked genuinely serious, almost cautious. The conditions directly involve Lauren. My pulse thundered in my ears. Harold? He took a deep breath. Robert believed there might come a day when Lauren would need protection. I felt tears forming. Not from sadness, from realization. Robert had seen something. Years ago. Long before I had. Long before Nancy's story. Long before the silence. Long before the curtain moved upstairs. And whatever Robert had seen had frightened him enough to redesign his entire estate plan. I looked at Harold. Tell me everything. But before he answered, he glanced toward the folder, toward Robert's signature, toward the pages that had remained hidden for nearly 2 years. And suddenly, I knew. The inheritance wasn't about money. It never had been. It was a trap Robert had carefully built, and someone was about to walk straight into it. I barely slept after my meeting with Harold Peterson. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Robert's handwritten note. If Lauren ever appears unable to act independently, additional protections must remain in place. The sentence repeated itself over and over in my head. For nearly 2 years, I had believed Robert's estate planning was simply routine. Now I knew better. He hadn't been planning for his death. He had been planning for Lauren's future. Or perhaps more accurately, he had been preparing for a danger he feared might someday surround her. The following afternoon, Harold called. His voice sounded unusually formal.
Vicki, the notices are ready.
I immediately knew what he meant. The inheritance meeting. The official gathering where the trust provisions would finally be revealed. Have they been sent? An hour ago. I felt my stomach tighten. And Lauren received one. Yes. What about Jason? He received one as well. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Harold quietly added something that surprised me. Be prepared. For what?
I have a feeling things may move quickly now.
Before I could ask what he meant, he ended the call. The rest of the afternoon crawled by. I tried reading. I tried gardening. I tried cleaning. Nothing worked. My mind kept returning to the same thought. If Jason truly cared about money as much as Robert suspected, that invitation would get his attention. Maybe that was exactly what Robert had intended. Maybe the trust had been designed to force certain people into the open. By 6 o'clock, I had almost convinced myself nothing would happen. Then my phone rang. The sound startled me so badly I nearly dropped the mug in my hand. I glanced at the screen and froze. Lauren. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The name remained there. Glowing. Real. Lauren Mitchell. My daughter. Calling me. The phone continued ringing. My hands trembled so violently I almost missed the call. When I finally answered, my voice barely worked. Hello. Silence. A few seconds of silence. Then a familiar voice.
Mom.
I closed my eyes immediately. For months, I had imagined hearing that word. Months. And now, it was real. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. Lauren. My voice cracked. Oh, sweetheart. Another pause. I've been meaning to call? The sentence felt rehearsed. Not false. Just careful. As though every word had been selected before the conversation began. Still, hearing her voice was enough to make my chest ache. Are you okay? A brief hesitation. I'm fine. The answer came too quickly, too automatically. Exactly the way people answer when they aren't fine. I tried to stay calm. I didn't want to scare her away. I've missed you. Silence. Then softly, I know. That hurt more than I expected. Not because of what she said, because of how sad she sounded saying it. The Lauren I remembered had always spoken with warmth, energy, life. This voice felt tired, exhausted, like someone carrying a burden they could no longer hide. For a moment, neither of us knew what to say. Months of silence stood between us. Months of unanswered questions. Months of pain. Finally, I spoke. I was worried. I know. Again, the same answer. I know. Not defensive, not angry, just defeated. My heart broke hearing it. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Why did you disappear? Are you safe? Are you happy? What is Jason doing? Why won't you talk to me? Instead, I asked something simpler. How have you been? Another pause. Busy. The word instantly reminded me of every text message, every excuse, every unanswered invitation. Busy. Always busy. For the first time, I noticed something else. She sounded nervous. Not because she was speaking to me, because she was speaking while someone else might be listening. The realization sent a chill down my spine. Then I heard it. Faintly. In the background. A man's voice. Jason. I couldn't make out the words. Only the voice itself. Low. Sharp. Close. Very close. Lauren immediately changed. It happened so fast I almost missed it. Her tone became brighter, more artificial, almost like an actress suddenly stepping onto a stage. Everything's going well, she said. The sentence sounded forced, painfully forced. I gripped the phone tighter. Lauren? A loud noise interrupted. A door closing. Then Jason's voice again. Closer this time. Lauren quickly continued speaking. So, anyway, I got the invitation. There it was. The real reason for the call. The inheritance meeting. Not me. Not our relationship. Not months of silence. The invitation. A sharp pain passed through my chest. For a second. Anger threatened to rise. Then I stopped myself. Something wasn't right. The timing was suspicious. But Lauren didn't sound excited about money. She sounded scared. Those were not the same thing.
What did you think about it? I asked carefully. Another hesitation. I'm not sure. Again, the answer felt guarded, as though she was navigating a minefield. Will you be there? Jason thinks we should attend. Not I think. Jason thinks. The wording immediately caught my attention. A tiny detail, but important. Very important. I remembered Harold's warnings. Robert's suspicions. The curtain upstairs. Nancy's story. Everything suddenly connected in ways I didn't like. What do you think, sweetheart? Silence. Longer this time. Then finally, I think Dad always had a reason for the things he did. The sentence stunned me. For the first time during the call. Lauren sounded genuine. Like herself. Like the daughter I remembered. Before I could respond, I heard movement again. Jason's voice. Closer. Much closer. Then Lauren abruptly shifted back to the careful tone. We'll see you at the meeting. My pulse quickened. The conversation was ending, and neither of us had said what we really wanted to say. Lauren, wait. Silence. Then softly, yes. The vulnerability in that single word nearly destroyed me. I swallowed hard.
There were so many things I wanted to tell her. I love you. I'm here. You're not alone. Whatever is happening, we'll figure it out. Instead, I simply said, no matter what happens, I'm glad you called. For a second, I thought I heard her breathing shake, almost like she was fighting tears. Then she whispered, "Me too." The line went dead. I sat motionless at my kitchen table. The phone remained in my hand. My heart felt simultaneously lighter and heavier. Lighter because I had finally heard my daughter's voice. Heavier because the conversation confirmed everything I feared. Lauren wasn't acting like someone who had simply drifted away from family. She was acting like someone under pressure, someone being watched, someone choosing every word carefully. An hour later, I replayed the conversation in my mind for the 20th time. Each detail felt important. Jason's presence, Lauren's nervousness, her sudden shifts in tone. Most of all, one particular sentence. Jason thinks we should attend. Not we want to attend. Not we're interested. Jason thinks. I suddenly realized something. The inheritance invitation hadn't brought Lauren back. It had brought Jason. And Lauren had come with him. For the first time, I began to understand what Robert's plan might have been. The trust wasn't merely protecting money. It was creating an opportunity, a situation where hidden motivations would reveal themselves, a situation where masks might finally fall. As darkness settled outside my windows, I looked at the framed photograph of Robert on the mantel. For years, I had believed grief was the hardest thing I would ever face. I was wrong, because now the truth was beginning to emerge. And I had a feeling that when the inheritance meeting finally arrived, everything Jason Mitchell had spent years hiding would start coming into the light. The inheritance meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. 7 days. That was all. 7 days until Robert's carefully constructed plan would finally be revealed. 7 days until I would see Lauren again. 7 days until Jason Mitchell walked into a room believing he was about to receive something valuable. The waiting was unbearable. Every morning I woke up thinking about the meeting. Every night I went to bed imagining what might happen. Part of me hoped I was wrong about everything. Part of me prayed that Lauren would arrive smiling, healthy, and happy, that she would explain away every strange event of the past year, that all of this had been one enormous misunderstanding. But deep down, I didn't believe that anymore. Neither did Harold. The day before the meeting, he called once more. "Everything is confirmed. Everyone is coming." "Yes." His voice paused. "Jason called my office 3 times this week." That immediately caught my attention. 3 times? He wanted information about the estate. I closed my eyes. What kind of information? Asset values. Of course. Not family history. Not Robert's wishes. Not legal procedures. Money. Always money. "Did you tell him anything?" "No." A hint of satisfaction entered Harold's voice. "I informed him that all information would be disclosed at the meeting." I could almost imagine Jason's reaction. The lack of control, the inability to know what was coming. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Robert's plan was already working. The next morning arrived gray and rainy. I spent nearly an hour deciding what to wear. Eventually, I chose a navy blue dress Robert had always liked. Simple, professional, respectful. As I stood in front of the mirror, I noticed how much older I looked than 2 years ago. Grief had a way of changing people. Worry did too. The woman staring back at me looked tired, but she also looked determined. And that mattered. I arrived at Harold's office nearly 40 minutes early. I couldn't sit at home another minute. The conference room was quiet. Coffee had been prepared. Folders were neatly arranged. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Everything looked ordinary, yet the tension in my chest kept building. At exactly 10:17 a.m., the receptionist entered. "They've arrived." My heart immediately began racing. I stood, turned toward the doorway, and saw Lauren for the first time in almost a year. The shock nearly knocked the breath out of me. She looked thinner, much thinner. Not unhealthy exactly, but diminished, as though life had been slowly draining the energy from her. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. Her shoulders seemed tense. Even the way she walked looked different. Cautious, guarded. For a brief moment, our eyes met. The world seemed to disappear. No lawyers, no meeting, no inheritance. Just a mother and daughter seeing each other after months of pain. I wanted to run to her, to hug her, to tell her everything would be okay. Instead, neither of us moved. Then Jason entered behind her. The atmosphere changed instantly. He wore an expensive suit, a polished watch, the confident smile of a man who believed he belonged in the room. The same smile he had worn for years. The same smile Robert never trusted. "Vicki." His tone was warm, almost friendly. The performance had begun. "Jason," I answered politely. "Nothing more." Lauren stepped forward. For a moment, it looked as though she wanted to hug me. Then she hesitated, glanced sideways, toward Jason, and stopped. The sight broke my heart. "Hi, Mom." Her voice sounded small. I smiled softly. "Hi, sweetheart." The silence that followed felt enormous. Months of hurt sat between us. Neither of us knew how to cross it. Jason quickly stepped in. Traffic was terrible. Nobody responded. Harold entered seconds later. He greeted everyone professionally, then suggested we move to a smaller waiting room until the meeting officially began. What followed was perhaps the most uncomfortable 45 minutes of my life. We sat around a small table, coffee cups untouched, rain continuing outside. Jason did most of the talking, about investments, about real estate, about market conditions. Nobody seemed interested except Jason himself. Lauren barely spoke. The longer I watched her, the more concerned I became. She wasn't merely quiet. She appeared exhausted. Several times I caught her staring into space, lost in thought, almost disconnected from the conversation entirely. Then something happened. Jason left the room to answer a phone call. The second he disappeared, Lauren changed. Not dramatically, subtly, but unmistakably. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing slowed. The tension around her eyes softened. The difference was so immediate that it made my skin crawl. Harold noticed it too. I could tell. For a few moments, nobody spoke. Then Lauren finally looked directly at me. The sadness in her eyes nearly brought me to tears. "How have you been?" Such a simple question. Yet it felt painfully important. "I've missed you." Her eyes immediately filled with emotion. For one terrifying second, I thought she might cry. Instead, she looked away. "I know." The same words she had used during the phone call. But this time they sounded different. This time they sounded guilty. Before I could respond, footsteps approached. Jason was returning. Lauren immediately straightened. The emotional wall slammed back into place, and just like that, she disappeared again. The transformation was impossible to ignore. Jason resumed his seat. The room returned to its uncomfortable normal. Yet now, I was certain of something. Lauren wasn't avoiding me because she didn't care. She was carrying something. Fear, pressure, pain, something. I just didn't know what. About 20 minutes later, Harold was called away briefly by another attorney. The moment he left, Jason began talking about the trust. Again and again and again. Almost obsessively. What kind of assets are involved? How large is the trust? How is it structured? Can beneficiaries access distributions immediately? The questions came rapidly, like someone trying desperately to gather information before an exam. I watched Lauren carefully. Every time Jason mentioned money, she seemed to withdraw further into herself, as though she wanted to be anywhere else. Then, unexpectedly, she stood. "I need the restroom." Jason nodded without looking up. Lauren left the room. The door closed behind her. A few minutes later, I decided to get another coffee, mostly because I needed air. As I stepped into the hallway, I noticed something near the water dispenser. A folded piece of paper. Small, white, lying on the floor. At first, I assumed someone had dropped it accidentally. Then I saw my name. Mom, written in Lauren's handwriting. My pulse exploded. I quickly picked it up, looked around. Nobody was watching. With trembling hands, I unfolded it. The message contained only 3 words. 3 simple words. Yet they changed everything. "Mom, don't trust Jason." I stared at the note. Once, twice, 3 times. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might faint. Every fear, every suspicion, every warning, every instinct, all of it suddenly felt real. Not because Harold suspected something, not because Robert worried, not because Nancy saw Lauren crying, because Lauren herself had finally spoken. Not out loud, not where Jason could hear, but clearly, directly, and desperately, For the first time, my daughter had reached out for help. And as I folded the note and slipped it into my purse, I realized the inheritance meeting was no longer the most important thing happening that day. The most important thing was this: Lauren was afraid of her husband, and she was finally trying to tell me. For the next 10 minutes, I sat in the hallway staring at Lauren's note. Mom, don't trust Jason. 3 simple words. 3 words that confirmed nearly every fear I had been carrying for months. Yet they also created 100 new questions. What exactly was Jason doing? How long had Lauren been afraid? Why hadn't she asked for help sooner? Most importantly, how much danger was she really in? I folded the note carefully and slipped it deeper into my purse just as Harold emerged from another office. Vicki, I quickly composed myself. I'm fine. He studied my face. I could tell he didn't believe me. But before he could ask further questions, the receptionist informed us that everything was ready. The inheritance meeting was about to begin. My heart started pounding again. This was it. The moment Robert had spent months preparing for. The moment Harold had been guarding for nearly 2 years. The moment Jason had been waiting for ever since the invitations arrived. We entered the conference room together. A long mahogany table occupied the center. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows. Several legal folders sat neatly arranged in front of each chair. Everything looked calm, orderly, professional. Yet beneath the surface, tension filled the room. Jason took a seat immediately. His confidence seemed almost exaggerated. He leaned back comfortably, crossed one leg over the other, smiled at everyone. The picture of a man expecting good news. Lauren sat beside him, quiet, withdrawn. Her eyes remained fixed on the table. I chose a seat across from them, close enough to watch, close enough to see every reaction. Harold remained standing. He waited until everyone settled. Then he opened a folder. Thank you all for coming. His voice carried the calm authority of a man who had spent decades delivering difficult news. We are here today to review the final provisions of Robert Walters' estate plan. Hearing Robert's name made my chest tighten. Even now, even after 2 years. Jason nodded politely, almost eagerly. Harold continued. As many of you know, Robert revised his estate planning documents approximately 6 months before his passing. Jason's expression remained unchanged. Still confident, still relaxed. Harold opened another document. Most of the estate assets were transferred into a private trust. I noticed Jason sit slightly straighter. His attention sharpened immediately. Money. We were finally discussing what interested him. The trust includes investment accounts, property holdings, retirement assets, and other financial resources. Jason's eyes practically lit up. Lauren didn't react at all. Not even slightly. That difference alone spoke volumes. Harold continued. The trust names Lauren Mitchell as the primary beneficiary. For the first time, Jason smiled openly. A small smile, but unmistakable. A smile of victory. My stomach turned. Then Harold spoke again, and everything changed. However, the single word immediately drew everyone's attention. Jason's smile faded. Harold calmly adjusted his glasses.
The trust is subject to several conditions established personally by Robert Walters. The room became silent. Jason frowned. What conditions? Harold ignored the interruption. Instead, he continued reading. Robert specifically instructed that trust assets may not be distributed directly unless certain requirements are satisfied. Jason leaned forward. The confidence was beginning to crack. What requirements? Harold finally looked up. Directly at him. Then he answered. The primary beneficiary must demonstrate financial independence and freedom from coercive influence. The room froze. I saw Jason blink. Once, twice, as though he wasn't sure he had heard correctly. What does that mean? His voice sounded noticeably less confident now. Harold remained calm. It means the beneficiary must be making decisions freely. Jason laughed. A short, nervous laugh. Of course she's making decisions freely. Nobody joined him. Nobody smiled. Nobody laughed. The silence that followed was deafening. Harold continued. The trust includes protective provisions. What protective provisions? Jason's tone had become sharper, more demanding. Harold opened another page. If there is evidence that the beneficiary is being manipulated, controlled, pressured, isolated, or financially exploited, distributions may be delayed or restricted. I watched Jason carefully. His jaw tightened. His fingers curled slightly against the table. The polished mask was beginning to slip. What kind of ridiculous condition is that? Harold didn't flinch. It is the condition Robert chose. Jason looked genuinely angry now. But who decides that the trust administrator, which is, I am? The room became silent again. For the first time, I saw genuine panic flicker behind Jason's eyes. Only briefly, but it was there, and once I saw it, I couldn't stop seeing it. Jason shifted in his chair. This makes no sense. Harold remained completely composed. It made sense to Robert. On what basis? The question came too quickly, too aggressively. Exactly the reaction I suspect Robert had anticipated. Harold folded his hands. Robert had concerns. The words landed like a bomb. Lauren slowly lifted her head. Jason went completely still. What concerns? Harold's voice remained measured. He worried that Lauren might someday be vulnerable to outside influence. Jason stared at him. In other words, Harold didn't look away. In other words, he wanted safeguards. For a brief moment, I thought Jason might explode. Instead, he forced a smile. A terrible smile. Thin, artificial, dangerous. Are you suggesting someone is controlling my wife? Nobody answered, because nobody needed to. The question itself revealed too much. Harold calmly continued. The trust also authorizes additional review if credible concerns are raised regarding financial coercion. Jason slammed a hand against the table. Not hard, but hard enough to startle everyone. This is absurd! Lauren visibly flinched. The reaction was immediate, instinctive. Fear. My heart broke the moment I saw it. Because that wasn't the reaction of a woman hearing her husband raise his voice. That was the reaction of someone accustomed to it. Someone expecting consequences. Jason noticed her reaction too. For a split second, something dark crossed his face. Then the mask returned. The charming husband, the reasonable professional. The performance resumed. This is all a misunderstanding. Harold said nothing. Jason looked toward Lauren. Tell them. The room became very still. Lauren froze. Tell them you're fine. My pulse quickened. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The entire room seemed to be waiting. Lauren looked at Jason, then at Harold, then at me. I saw something happening behind her eyes. A battle. Fear versus truth. Silence versus courage. For months, perhaps years. Then Jason spoke again, a little more firmly. Lauren. The warning in his voice was unmistakable. And suddenly, I understood. This wasn't the first time he had spoken to her that way. Not even close. Lauren lowered her eyes. The room remained silent. Then, very softly, she said, I'm tired. The words seemed insignificant, yet the pain behind them was devastating. Jason immediately answered, We've all been stressed. Lauren didn't respond. Harold quietly closed one folder and opened another. His expression had changed, subtly, but enough for me to notice. He was no longer merely presenting information. He was observing, evaluating, watching, exactly as Robert intended. Then Harold spoke again, and the next revelation hit even harder. There is one final provision. Jason looked exhausted already. What now? Harold calmly answered. Before any distribution occurs, the beneficiary may be interviewed privately. Jason immediately sat upright. Privately? Yes. No. The response came instantly. Too instantly. Everyone in the room noticed. Harold's voice remained calm. The trust requires it. Jason looked furious. That's unnecessary. Harold slowly removed his glasses. Then he said the words Robert had prepared years earlier. It is mandatory. And for the first time since the meeting began, I saw genuine fear enter Jason Mitchell's eyes. Because suddenly, he realized something. This wasn't an inheritance he could control. It was an inheritance designed to expose him. Nobody spoke for several seconds after Harold announced the private interview requirement. The silence was suffocating. I could hear the rain against the windows, the distant hum of traffic below the building, the faint ticking of a wall clock. Every sound seemed amplified, because everyone in the room understood the same thing. The private interview represented danger. Not for Lauren, for Jason. And he knew it. His face remained composed. Mostly, but tiny cracks had begun appearing. The clenched jaw, the tightness around his eyes, the way his fingers repeatedly tapped the tabletop. I had known Jason for nearly a decade. I had never seen him nervous before. Now he looked terrified. Harold calmly organized several documents. Then he continued. There are additional matters that must be addressed. Jason exhaled sharply. Of course there are. The sarcasm in his voice was impossible to miss. Harold ignored it. Instead, he removed another folder, a thinner one, different from the others. Immediately, something changed in the room.
Even Harold's posture seemed more serious. My stomach tightened. "What is that?" I asked. Harold glanced toward me. "Supplementary documentation." Jason frowned. "Documentation regarding what?" Harold opened the folder. "Robert's concerns?" For the first time, Jason's confidence visibly faltered. His eyes narrowed. "What concerns?" Harold carefully removed several pages. Before updating the trust, Robert documented a series of observations. I felt my pulse quicken. Observations. That sounded deliberate, intentional. Robert hadn't merely worried, he had kept records. Jason laughed nervously. "You're telling me my father-in-law kept notes about me?" Harold looked directly at him. "Yes." The room became still. Lauren slowly raised her head. I could see surprise in her face. Apparently, she hadn't known this either. Neither had I. Harold adjusted his glasses. Then he began reading. Observation 1. His voice remained steady. Repeated inquiries regarding the estimated value of family assets. Jason immediately interrupted. "That's ridiculous." Harold continued reading. Observation 2. Jason's face tightened. Discussion of inheritance timing on multiple occasions. I remembered those conversations suddenly. Not clearly, but enough. Family dinners. Holiday gatherings. Casual questions. Questions that seemed harmless at the time. Questions that now sounded very different. Jason shifted in his chair. "This proves nothing." Harold nodded. "Correct." Jason seemed relieved. For about 2 seconds. Then Harold continued, which is why Robert continued documenting additional concerns. The relief vanished. Harold turned another page. Observation 3. My heart pounded. Attempts to encourage Lauren to reduce professional commitments and rely more heavily on marital financial planning. Lauren froze. Completely froze. I immediately noticed it. So did Harold. So did Jason. A terrible silence filled the room. Because that observation wasn't theoretical. It was real. Lauren had quit her job. A fact nobody had explained. A fact Jason clearly didn't want discussed. Harold continued. Observation 4. Jason looked furious now. Repeated expressions of interest regarding future control of inherited assets. The words hit like a hammer. Jason stood abruptly. His chair scraped loudly across the floor. "This is outrageous." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The outburst only made him look worse. Harold calmly waited, then said, "Please sit down." Jason remained standing. "This entire meeting is based on assumptions." Harold didn't flinch. "No." His voice was firm now. "It is based on legal documents prepared by Robert Walters." Jason stared at him, then finally sat. But the charming mask was gone. Completely gone. What remained beneath looked angry, frustrated, desperate. Exactly the opposite of the man who had entered the room earlier. I looked toward Lauren. She seemed frightened. Not by Harold, not by the meeting, by Jason. Every time his voice rose, her shoulders tightened. Every time he became angry, she became smaller. The realization made me sick. How many times had this happened at home? How many arguments had she endured? How many years Harold carefully placed the papers back into the folder? Then he said something unexpected. "There is one more item." Jason laughed bitterly. "Why not?" Harold opened a sealed envelope. The moment I saw Robert's handwriting, tears immediately filled my eyes. I recognized it instantly. The envelope looked old, worn, as though it had been waiting years for this exact moment. Harold held it carefully. Robert left instructions that this statement be read if concerns regarding coercion ever arose. The room became silent again. Jason looked uneasy. Lauren stared at the envelope. My heart ached. Robert, even now, even after death, he was trying to protect our daughter. Harold unfolded the letter, then began reading. If this letter is being read, it means circumstances developed exactly as I feared they might. A chill passed through me. Lauren covered her mouth. Jason stared at the table. Harold continued. I pray I was wrong. The room remained motionless. But if I was right, then Lauren may need help recognizing what is happening around her. My chest tightened. Every word felt personal. Every word felt intentional. Robert had written this knowing he might never be there when it was needed. Harold kept reading. Love does not isolate people from family. Lauren's eyes filled with tears. Love does not require fear. Jason looked away. Love does not demand control. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. The room had become frozen in time. Then came the sentence that changed everything. If my daughter ever finds herself afraid to speak honestly in front of the person she loves, she should know that something is terribly wrong. Lauren broke. Not completely. Not yet, but I saw it happen. The tears arrived, slowly, silently, rolling down her face. Jason immediately noticed. Lauren. His voice carried warning. Not comfort. Warning. The difference was impossible to ignore. I felt anger rising inside me. A deep anger. The kind that only appears when someone hurts your child. Harold lowered the letter. The room remained silent. Then Jason spoke. His voice sounded strained. Robert didn't know what he was talking about. Nobody answered. These are assumptions. Still, nobody answered. Finally, he looked directly at Lauren. Tell them. Again. The same demand. The same pressure. The same expectation. Tell them. Lauren remained silent. Jason leaned forward. Lauren. The warning grew stronger. I could almost feel the fear radiating from her. Then something happened. Something small, yet incredibly important. Lauren didn't look at Jason. She looked at me. For only a second. But in that second, I saw something I hadn't seen in months. Hope. Tiny. Fragile. But real. The kind of hope people feel when they realize they might not be alone anymore. Jason didn't notice. I did. And suddenly, I understood. The meeting was no longer unfolding according to his plan. The trust wasn't giving him access to money. The trust was exposing his behavior. Piece by piece, question by question, reaction by reaction. Exactly as Robert intended. Harold carefully returned the letter to its envelope. Then he spoke. "The private interview will begin shortly." Jason immediately tensed. "No." The answer came automatically. Harold looked at him. "It isn't optional." Jason's voice rose. "I said no." Harold remained perfectly calm. "The trust requires it." Jason looked toward Lauren, then toward me, then toward the letter. For the first time, he seemed to realize how much ground he had lost. The room was no longer under his control. Neither was the conversation. Neither was Lauren. Not entirely. And that terrified him. Then Harold delivered the final blow. "There is also evidence I have not yet presented." The words landed like thunder. Jason's face went pale. Actually pale. "What evidence?" Harold met his eyes, and for the first time all day, I saw something resembling satisfaction. The satisfaction of a man who knew exactly what was coming. The satisfaction of a man carrying information someone desperately wanted hidden. Harold closed the folder. "We'll discuss that next." And as I watched Jason Mitchell struggle to hide his fear, I realized Robert's trap had worked even better than anyone imagined, because Jason was beginning to expose himself, and we hadn't even reached the most damaging evidence yet. For a few moments after Harold's announcement, nobody moved. The room felt trapped between two worlds, but one world contained the lies that had survived for years. The other contained the truth that was finally beginning to emerge. And standing between them was Lauren, my daughter, the little girl who used to run through our backyard laughing, the young woman who once told me everything, the woman who now looked as though she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Jason was the first to speak. "What evidence?" His voice sounded strained, tight, controlled, but beneath the surface, panic was growing. I could hear it. Harold calmly folded his hands. "We'll discuss that shortly." "No." Jason leaned forward. "I'd like to discuss it now." Harold didn't react. "The process will proceed according to the trust requirements." Jason's jaw tightened. For the first time since entering the building, he looked completely out of his depth. Because money wasn't solving this problem. Charm wasn't solving this problem. Control wasn't solving this problem. The system Robert created was forcing everything into the open, and Jason couldn't stop it. The room fell silent again. Then something unexpected happened. Lauren spoke, very quietly, but she spoke. "I'd like to say something." Every head turned toward her, including Jason's. The fear that flashed across his face lasted only a second, but it was enough, because it wasn't the reaction of a loving husband. It was the reaction of someone who had suddenly lost control of a situation. Lauren clasped her hands together. They were trembling. I wanted to go to her, to hold her hand, to tell her she wasn't alone. Instead, I remained where I was, because this moment belonged to her. She needed to take it herself. Harold nodded gently. Go ahead, Lauren. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. Tears filled her eyes. She looked down at the table, then at the letter Robert had written, then finally at me. When she spoke again, her voice broke. I'm sorry. The words hit me like a wave. Not because I wanted an apology, because of the pain behind them. Years of pain. Months of pain. Pain she had apparently been carrying alone. Mom. Her voice cracked again. I'm so sorry. My eyes filled immediately. I shook my head. You don't have to. Yes. She interrupted softly. I do. The room remained completely still. Lauren took a shaky breath. Then another. And then the truth finally began. I never stopped loving you. The tears came instantly. Not just hers. Mine too. Because for months I had wondered. For months I had questioned everything. For months I had feared my daughter no longer wanted me. And now, finally, I knew that had never been the truth. I wanted to call. Her voice trembled. I wanted to visit. Another tear rolled down her cheek. I wanted to come home. Jason stared at her. Silent, rigid, dangerously silent. Lauren continued. But every time I tried, she stopped. The words refused to come. Harold waited patiently. Nobody rushed her. Nobody interrupted. Finally, she whispered, it became a fight. The room froze. I felt my stomach drop. Not because I was surprised, because hearing it confirmed was devastating. Lauren looked at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. At first, it was little things. Her voice was barely above a whisper. He didn't like how often I talked to Mom. Jason immediately shifted. That's not true. Lauren flinched. The reaction happened automatically, instinctively, like someone expecting punishment. The sight made me sick. Harold looked directly at Jason. Please let her finish. Jason fell silent, but anger radiated from him. Lauren continued. He said I depended on my family too much. Another pause. He said married people should focus on each other. That sounded reasonable on the surface, even normal. But Lauren wasn't finished. He started criticizing every visit. Another tear. Every phone call. Another. Every holiday. My heart shattered. Because I remembered those canceled dinners, those unanswered invitations, those excuses, all the times I blamed myself, all the times I thought I had done something wrong. Lauren wiped her eyes. At first I argued. She laughed bitterly, a humorless laugh. I argued a lot. For a moment, she seemed lost in memory. Then her expression darkened. But eventually, it wasn't worth it. Nobody spoke.
Nobody moved. The room had become completely focused on her. Years of silence were finally breaking. Lauren swallowed hard. Then things got worse. Jason's face had become pale. Very pale. The confidence from earlier was completely gone. Lauren continued. He wanted access to everything. I felt my pulse quicken. Everything. Such a simple word, yet incredibly revealing. My accounts? She counted on her fingers. My passwords? Another finger. My finances? Another. My email? The room grew colder. He said married couples shouldn't keep secrets. Again, on the surface, reasonable. But something about the way Lauren said it made my stomach twist. Because these weren't requests. They were demands. I gave him access. A tear slipped down her face. Then I couldn't get it back. Jason looked away. Lauren continued speaking, almost as though the truth had finally become impossible to stop. He started reading my messages. I felt anger rising inside me. Raw. Protective. Maternal. He questioned every conversation. Another pause. He monitored my calls. The room remained silent. Even Harold looked disturbed now. Then came the revelation that explained everything. Everything. Lauren lowered her eyes. I didn't send most of those messages. The words hit me like lightning. My heart nearly stopped. What? The question escaped my mouth before I could stop it. Lauren looked at me and nodded, slowly, painfully. The birthday message. She swallowed. The Christmas message. Another swallow. The short replies. Tears filled her eyes. Many of them weren't written by me. The room went silent, absolutely silent. I remembered every cold text, every strange response, every moment that felt wrong. My instincts, Nancy's concerns, the strange wording, all of it. I wasn't imagining it. Lauren wiped away tears. Sometimes he answered for me. I closed my eyes. The realization was unbearable. Months. Months of pain. Months of confusion. Months believing my daughter didn't care. When in reality, she had been disappearing behind someone else's control. Then Lauren said something that hurt even more. I thought you hated me. I stared at her. What? Her voice broke completely. He told me you were angry. The room spun. He told me you were tired of being disappointed. More tears. He said you stopped calling because you didn't care anymore. I couldn't breathe. The cruelty of it was unimaginable, deliberate, calculated, designed to isolate, designed to separate, designed to control. Lauren began crying openly now. I believed him. My own tears were flowing freely, because suddenly everything made sense. The distance, the silence, the misunderstandings, the isolation. It had all been engineered, slowly, carefully, over years.
Then Lauren looked toward Harold, toward the trust documents, toward Robert's letter. And finally, she said the words that changed the entire room. "I brought evidence." Jason froze, completely froze. Lauren reached into her purse, then carefully placed a thick envelope on the table. "I've been collecting it for almost a year." And for the first time that day, genuine fear appeared in Jason Mitchell's eyes, because the woman he thought he controlled had been preparing for this moment all along. The envelope sat on the table like a live grenade. Nobody touched it. Nobody spoke. Even the sound of the rain outside seemed to disappear. All eyes were fixed on Lauren. My daughter had spent nearly a year collecting evidence. A year. While everyone, including me, believed she was trapped. Silent and powerless. The realization filled me with equal parts pride and heartbreak. Because no one gathers evidence against their spouse unless something has gone terribly wrong. Jason stared at the envelope. The color had drained from his face. For the first time since I had known him, he looked genuinely afraid. Not angry. Not frustrated. Afraid. Lauren placed both hands on the table to stop their trembling. Then she spoke. "I didn't know if I would ever use it." Her voice was quiet, but steady. "I started saving things because I felt like I was losing my mind." Nobody interrupted. She continued. "Every time something happened, I was told it didn't happen." A chill ran through me. Every time I questioned something, I was told I remembered it wrong. Harold exchanged a glance with another attorney sitting nearby. Both looked concerned. Lauren swallowed. "Eventually, I started keeping records." Jason suddenly leaned forward. "This is ridiculous." Lauren flinched. Again. The reaction happened automatically. And once again, everyone noticed, including Jason. The room grew even colder. Harold calmly spoke. "Please allow her to continue." Jason opened his mouth, then closed it. The control he once had over the room was disappearing. Lauren slowly opened the envelope. Several documents emerged. Printed emails, bank statements, screenshots, notes, a small digital recorder. The sight alone was enough to make my stomach tighten. This wasn't the work of someone inventing stories. This was preparation. Careful preparation. Lauren handed the documents to Harold. "I made copies." Harold accepted them. He began reviewing the first pages. The longer he read, the more serious his expression became. Jason noticed. His breathing became heavier. "What exactly are we looking at?" Lauren answered before Harold could. "Proof." One word. Simple. Devastating. Harold examined another page. Then another. Then another. Finally, he looked up. "These records indicate repeated transfers between accounts." Jason immediately responded. "So," Harold didn't look away. "Accounts belonging solely to Lauren." The room fell silent. Jason shifted in his chair. Lauren stared at the table. Harold continued. "Many of these transfers occurred electronically." He turned another page. "Some were apparently authorized from Lauren's devices." Jason smiled. A desperate smile.
Then they were authorized. Harold remained calm. Perhaps. The single word carried enormous weight. Jason's smile disappeared. Then Harold lifted another document. This appears to be a written record maintained by Lauren. Lauren nodded. For months, maybe years, she had been documenting everything: dates, conversations, incidents, patterns, things she feared nobody would believe later. My heart broke imagining her doing that alone. Then Harold paused. His eyes landed on something. He reread it. Twice. The room became still. "What is it?" I asked. Harold looked toward Lauren. "Would you like to explain this entry?" Lauren's face tightened. She looked terrified. Yet she nodded. Slowly. The entry was dated nearly 8 months earlier. Harold slid the page across the table. Lauren stared at it, then closed her eyes briefly. When she spoke again, her voice trembled. "That was the day I tried to leave." My breath caught. The room froze. "What?" The word escaped before I could stop it. Lauren looked at me, tears already forming. "I packed a suitcase." I felt my chest tighten. "I was going to come home." The pain in her voice was unbearable. My daughter had tried to come home. "And I never knew," Lauren continued. "I made it all the way to the front door." The room remained silent. Even Jason wasn't speaking now. He found the suitcase. Another pause. A painful pause. Then, "and he convinced me to stay." The wording immediately caught my attention. Convinced. Not forced. Not threatened. Convinced. The kind of word victims often use when they're still processing what happened. Harold carefully folded his hands. "How did he convince you?" Lauren looked down. For several seconds, she couldn't answer. Then she whispered, "He said nobody wanted me." My heart shattered. Completely. "He said Mom had moved on." Tears streamed down her face. "He said everyone was tired of dealing with me." Another tear. "He said I'd be alone." I could barely breathe. The cruelty of it was unimaginable. Calculated. Personal. Targeted. Designed specifically to isolate. Designed specifically to keep her trapped. Lauren wiped her eyes. I believed him. The room remained silent. Then Jason finally spoke. "That's not what happened." His voice sounded desperate now. Not confident. Not charming. Desperate. Lauren turned toward him. For the first time all day. And something had changed. The fear was still there, but something else had appeared beside it. Strength. The strength that comes when secrets finally lose their power. "Yes." Her voice was quiet. "But it is." Jason stared at her. Shocked. As though he couldn't believe she had contradicted him. Publicly. Openly. Without apology. For years. Perhaps she had stayed silent. Now she wasn't. And that terrified him. Harold continued reviewing documents. Then he reached the small digital recorder.
What is this?
Lauren inhaled slowly, then answered, Recordings. The room instantly became still. Jason's face turned white. Actually white. Every drop of blood seemed to leave it. The reaction alone told me everything. Lauren noticed too. So did Harold. What kind of recordings? He asked. Lauren looked directly at him. Conversations. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. The atmosphere had become electric. The recorder sat in the center of the table. Small, ordinary, yet somehow more threatening than every document combined.
Jason suddenly stood.
No.
The word exploded from him.
Harold looked up. No. Those recordings are private.
Lauren stared at him.
You never cared about privacy.
Jason ignored her.
They can't be used.
Harold calmly answered.
We haven't even heard them yet.
Jason looked trapped. Cornered.
Like an animal realizing every exit was closing. Then something happened. Something that finally shattered whatever remained of his mask. He turned toward Lauren. His eyes burned with anger. Raw anger. The kind he had spent years hiding from everyone else. You said you deleted those. The words escaped before he could stop them. The second they left his mouth. He realized his mistake.
Everyone heard it. Everyone. The room went completely silent. Lauren stared at him. Harold stared at him. I stared at him.
Because with one sentence, Jason had just confirmed the recordings existed. And more importantly, he knew exactly what was on them. Jason seemed to realize it immediately. His expression changed. Panic. Pure panic. Then he attempted to recover. Attempted to explain. Attempted to backtrack. But it was too late. The damage was done. Lauren slowly reached for the recorder. Her hand trembled, but only slightly. Then she looked directly at Harold and spoke the words that changed everything. I think it's time everyone heard the truth. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Jason Mitchell looked like a man who knew he was about to lose everything. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Lauren's hand rested on the digital recorder. Jason stared at it as though it were a weapon. In many ways, it was. Because the truth can destroy lies faster than anything else. The room remained frozen. Then Harold finally nodded. Go ahead. Lauren took a shaky breath. Her fingers trembled as she pressed a button. A soft click filled the room. Static. For a second, all we heard was white noise. Then voices emerged. Jason's voice. Clear. Undeniable. My stomach dropped instantly. Because it wasn't the voice he used in public. It wasn't the charming voice. It wasn't the polished voice. It wasn't the professional voice. It was colder, harder, crueler. You don't need your mother. Silence filled the room after the recording spoke. Then Jason's recorded voice continued. All she does is make you feel guilty. I closed my eyes. The words felt like knives. Lauren sat motionless, listening, reliving. Harold remained completely still. The recording continued. If she really loved you, she would have moved on by now. A pause. Then Lauren's voice. Smaller. Nervous. That's not fair. Jason laughed. A short laugh. Mocking. Cruel. The kind of laugh meant to humiliate. You're still defending her. The recording ended. The room remained silent. Nobody needed an explanation. Nobody needed interpretation. The meaning was obvious. Harold slowly looked up. Jason immediately spoke. That conversation is out of context. Nobody answered, because there was no context that improved what we had just heard. Lauren pressed another button. Another recording began. This one was worse. Much worse. The voices sounded louder, angrier, more intense, apparently recorded during an argument. Jason's voice filled the room. You don't need your own account. A pause. We're married. Another pause. I'll handle the money. Lauren's recorded voice sounded exhausted. I just want access to my savings. Jason laughed again. That same terrible laugh. You don't trust me, the recording continued. And with every passing second, Jason seemed to shrink. Not physically, emotionally. The powerful, confident man from earlier had vanished. In his place sat someone exposed, someone cornered, someone watching years of manipulation collapse. The second recording ended. Nobody spoke. Then Lauren quietly said, There are 12 more. Jason closed his eyes. For the first time, he looked defeated. Harold carefully folded his hands. I don't think we'll need all 12. The statement carried enormous weight, because the recordings had already accomplished their purpose. The truth was undeniable. The room remained silent for several moments. Then something surprising happened. Jason stood, not angrily, not dramatically, slowly, almost mechanically, as though his body no longer knew what to do. Lauren instinctively tensed. The reaction broke my heart. Even now, even after everything, part of her still expected danger. Jason looked around the room, at Harold, at me, at the documents, at the recorder. Finally, he looked at Lauren. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Jason said something I never expected. I'm leaving. Nobody stopped him. Nobody argued. Nobody even responded. Because everyone understood. There was nothing left to say. The evidence had spoken. The recordings had spoken. His own reactions had spoken. Everything was over. Jason reached for his briefcase, then paused. For one brief second, I thought he might apologize. I thought he might admit what he had done. I thought he might finally tell the truth. Instead, he looked at Lauren and said, You'll regret this. The words echoed through the room, and suddenly, any remaining doubt disappeared. Even now, even after being exposed, even after losing, he was still trying to control her, still trying to frighten her, still trying to maintain power. Lauren stared at him, and something remarkable happened. She didn't look away. For the first time since entering the building, she held his gaze, steadily, confidently, without fear.
No. Her voice was quiet, but firm. I won't. Jason froze. The response clearly surprised him. Because the woman sitting before him wasn't the woman he thought he knew anymore. The silence stretched. Then Jason turned, walked toward the door, and left. Just like that. No dramatic confrontation. No final speech. No victory. Only failure. The door closed behind him. The sound echoed through the room, and for the first time in years, my daughter was free. Nobody spoke immediately. Lauren simply stared at the closed door, almost as though she couldn't believe it, almost as though she expected him to return. After several long seconds, her shoulders began shaking. Then the tears came. Not quiet tears, not controlled tears. Years of tears. Years of fear. Years of pain. Everything erupted at once. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed. My heart shattered. Without thinking, I stood, crossed the room, and wrapped my arms around her. For a moment, she froze. Then she collapsed into me. The way she used to when she was a little girl. The way she used to after nightmares. The way she used to after bad days at school. And suddenly, none of the lost years mattered. None of the silence mattered. None of the misunderstandings mattered. Because she was my daughter. And she was finally home. We cried together. Neither of us caring who saw. Neither of us caring how long it lasted. Eventually, Lauren pulled back. Her eyes were swollen, red, exhausted, but lighter. Noticeably lighter. As though a weight she had carried for years had finally been removed. I'm sorry. Mom. The words came again. This time, softer. I shook my head immediately. No. Fresh tears filled my eyes. You have nothing to apologize for. I should have called. No. I should have come home. No. My voice broke. You survived. The room became quiet again. Lauren stared at me, then finally whispered, I didn't think you'd forgive me. The statement hurt more than anything else that day, because it revealed how deeply the manipulation had gone, how completely Jason had isolated her. I took both her hands. Lauren. She looked at me. Listen carefully. A tear rolled down my cheek. There is absolutely nothing you could ever do that would make me stop loving you. Her face crumpled. Fresh tears appeared, and for the first time in nearly a year, I saw my daughter. Not the frightened woman. Not the isolated wife. Not the exhausted victim. My daughter. The real Lauren. The woman she had always been. The woman Robert believed would eventually find her way back. Harold quietly gave us time. Then, after several minutes, he approached. The trust provisions can wait. Lauren looked surprised. What? He smiled gently. Today isn't about money. I immediately thought of Robert and realized how right Harold was. This was never about money. Never. The inheritance, the trust, the conditions, the meeting. All of it had served a different purpose, a greater purpose. Robert hadn't built a trust fund. He had built a rescue plan. And somehow, from beyond the grave, it had worked. As Lauren squeezed my hand, I looked toward the rain-covered windows and silently thanked my husband. Because even after death, Robert Walters had found a way to protect his daughter, and now the long journey toward healing could finally begin. The days following the inheritance meeting felt unreal. For nearly a year, I had lived inside confusion, questions, fear, silence. Now the truth had finally surfaced. Yet healing wasn't as simple as exposing a lie. In many ways, the hardest part was only beginning. 3 days after the meeting, Lauren moved into my house. Not permanently. At least that was what she told me. She arrived with 3 suitcases, 2 boxes, and eyes that looked older than they should have. I didn't ask how long she planned to stay. I didn't ask what came next. I simply opened the front door and welcomed my daughter home. The first night was difficult. Neither of us slept much. The house felt strange. Not bad, just unfamiliar. For years it had been occupied by grief. Now it was occupied by recovery. And recovery is rarely quiet. Around 2 a.m, I heard footsteps. I found Lauren sitting alone in the kitchen. A cup of tea rested untouched in front of her. Moonlight spilled through the window. She looked exhausted. I sat beside her. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, she whispered, "I keep expecting my phone to ring." I knew exactly who she meant. "Has he called?" Lauren nodded. 32 times. I stared at her. 32. She gave a weak laugh. Last time I checked. The number made my stomach turn. Not because I was surprised, because it confirmed everything. Control doesn't disappear quietly. People who lose control often fight desperately to regain it. "Did you answer?" Lauren shook her head. No. For the first time, I saw a tiny spark of strength behind her exhaustion. A tiny spark, but growing. The following week brought more revelations. Some painful, some shocking, some strangely freeing. Lauren began meeting regularly with an attorney recommended by Harold. Not because she wanted revenge, not because she wanted money, because she wanted her life back. As legal proceedings moved forward, additional information surfaced. Financial records, email histories, hidden transfers, manipulations she hadn't even known existed. The deeper investigators looked, the more disturbing the picture became. Jason hadn't merely controlled conversations. He had systematically isolated her. Family, friends, co-workers, anyone who might provide support, anyone who might challenge his influence. One afternoon, Lauren sat across from me at the dining room table reviewing documents. Halfway through, she suddenly started crying. I immediately moved closer. "What is it?" She handed me a printed email. I read it, then felt my chest tighten. The message had been sent nearly 10 months earlier, from Lauren's account, to her college friend Melissa. The email ended their friendship, coldly, abruptly, cruelly. The problem, Lauren had never written it. Jason had, using her account, without her knowledge. The realization horrified both of us.
And it wasn't the only example. There were others. More emails, more messages, more relationships quietly damaged behind the scenes. For years, people thought Lauren had chosen distance. In reality, many had been pushed away without ever knowing it. The truth broke her heart. But it also gave her something important: perspective. For the first time, she understood how the isolation happened. It hadn't occurred overnight. It had happened slowly. One relationship at a time. One conversation at a time. One manipulation at a time. Exactly the way Robert feared it would. One Sunday afternoon, about a month after the meeting, Lauren and I visited Robert's grave. It was her idea. The sky was clear, the grass freshly cut. Birds chirped somewhere nearby. Peaceful, almost too peaceful. We stood quietly for several minutes. Neither of us knew what to say. Eventually, Lauren knelt beside the headstone. Her fingers brushed gently across Robert's name. Then she began crying. Not the desperate crying from the inheritance meeting. Something different. Something deeper. Grief. Pure grief. The kind that comes when you finally allow yourself to feel. I should have listened to you. Her voice trembled. I felt tears forming immediately. He tried to warn me. She looked up at me. He really did. Didn't he? I nodded slowly. Yes. More tears rolled down her face. I thought he was being protective. I smiled sadly. He was. Lauren laughed softly through her tears. I guess he was right. I looked down at Robert's name. 1,000 memories flooded through me. His smile. His laugh. His stubbornness. His loyalty. His love for Lauren. Especially his love for Lauren. Then something occurred to me. For months, maybe years, I had viewed Robert's estate plan as paperwork, legal documents, financial planning, assets. Now I understood what it truly was. Love. The entire thing had been an act of love. One final attempt by a father to protect his child. And somehow, against all odds, it succeeded. A few weeks later, another important moment arrived. Lauren attended her first family gathering since everything happened. Nothing elaborate. Just a small barbecue at Diane's house. Family. Food. Laughter. Normal life. Yet Lauren was terrified. As we drove there, she barely spoke. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap. What if everyone hates me? The question broke my heart. They won't. What if they're angry? They aren't. What if they don't understand? I reached across the center console and squeezed her hand. Then we'll explain. When we arrived, Lauren nearly turned around. I could see panic building. Years of isolation had left scars. Deep scars. But then Diane spotted us. Without hesitation, she crossed the yard, wrapped Lauren in a hug, and refused to let go. Everything changed after that, one by one. Relatives approached, not with anger, not with judgment, with love, with concern, with relief. Many cried. Some apologized for not recognizing the signs sooner. Others admitted they thought Lauren simply wanted distance. Nobody blamed her. Nobody rejected her. Watching those reunions felt like witnessing a garden come back to life after a brutal winter. Slowly, patiently, beautifully. That evening, as the sun began setting, I found Lauren sitting alone on Diane's back porch. Unlike previous times, she wasn't crying. She was smiling, genuinely smiling. For the first time in years, I sat beside her for several moments. We watched the sunset together. Then she quietly said, "I forgot what this felt like." What? She looked toward the yard, toward family, toward laughter, toward connection. Belonging. The word nearly brought me to tears, because that was exactly what Jason had stolen. Not money, not property, not independence, belonging. And now she was reclaiming it, piece by piece, day by day, one relationship at a time. As darkness settled across the yard, Lauren rested her head on my shoulder, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. We sat there in comfortable silence, and for the first time in a very long time, I allowed myself to believe something I hadn't dared believe before. The worst was behind us. The healing wasn't finished. The scars remained. The legal battles continued. But my daughter was no longer trapped. She was no longer alone. And she was finally finding her way back to herself. 1 year later, I found myself standing in front of a room filled with strangers. A younger version of me would have hated public speaking. But life has a way of changing people, especially after they survive something they never expected. The room belonged to a community center in Columbus, Ohio. Nothing fancy, just a renovated brick building with folding chairs, warm lighting, and a coffee station near the entrance. Yet to me, it felt more meaningful than any luxury hotel ballroom could ever be. Because this room represented hope, and hope had become very important to our family. I looked toward the front row. Lauren smiled back at me. A real smile. The kind that reached her eyes. The kind I hadn't seen in years before the inheritance meeting. Seeing it still felt like a miracle. A year had passed since Jason walked out of Harold Peterson's office. A year since the recordings. A year since the truth emerged. A year since my daughter came home. So much had happened since then. The legal proceedings eventually concluded. Evidence continued surfacing for months. Financial manipulation. Unauthorized account activity. Patterns of coercive control. The case never became a dramatic television spectacle. There were no flashing cameras, no sensational headlines, just facts. Quiet facts. And sometimes, facts are more powerful than drama. Jason ultimately faced serious legal consequences related to financial misconduct. More importantly, he could no longer control Lauren's life. That chapter finally ended. The healing chapter began. It wasn't fast. It wasn't easy. It wasn't perfect. Healing rarely is. Some mornings, Lauren still woke from nightmares. Some days, she still doubted herself. Sometimes, she apologized for things that weren't her fault. Sometimes she questioned decisions she no longer needed permission to make. Recovery isn't a straight line. It's a winding road. One step forward, half a step back, then forward again. But she kept moving, and little by little, she rediscovered herself. The strongest proof appeared in the smallest moments. The first time she opened a bank account completely on her own. The first time she planned a vacation without asking anyone's approval. The first time she laughed without looking over her shoulder. The first time she disagreed with someone without fear. Tiny victories. Beautiful victories. Victories that many people take for granted. Then something unexpected happened. One evening, Lauren and I were sitting on the back porch watching the sunset. The same porch where Robert and I had spent countless evenings together. The same porch where he once warned me to keep an eye on our daughter. Lauren looked thoughtful. What if we could help other people? I turned toward her. What do you mean? She stared out across the yard. There have to be others. I knew exactly what she meant. Other women, other families, other people trapped inside invisible forms of control. People who didn't realize what was happening. People who felt isolated. People who believed they were alone. The same way Lauren once did. The idea grew from there. Slowly. Naturally. One conversation became several. Several became a plan. Eventually, with help from Harold and a few community leaders, we created something neither of us had originally imagined. The Walters Family Foundation. A small, non-profit organization focused on helping women reconnect with support systems after experiencing emotional isolation and financial control. Nothing enormous. Nothing glamorous, but meaningful. Very meaningful. We funded educational workshops, support groups, legal resource referrals, financial literacy programs. The work wasn't about money. It was about freedom. And every time someone walked through our doors seeking help, I thought of Lauren, because I knew exactly how easily a person could disappear while standing in plain sight. That was why we were gathered at the community center that evening. The foundation was celebrating its first anniversary. More than 60 women had received support during the previous year. Several families had reunited. Countless lives had changed, including ours. After the presentation ended, guests began leaving. The room gradually emptied. Soon, only Lauren and I remained, along with Harold. Of course, Harold had become something of a family hero, though he never accepted the title. As we cleaned up chairs, he approached carrying a small envelope. Immediately, I recognized the handwriting. My breath caught. Robert. Lauren froze too. Neither of us had seen that handwriting since the inheritance meeting. Harold smiled softly. I've been saving this. Lauren stared at him. What is it? A final instruction. My heart immediately accelerated. Harold carefully handed her the envelope. Your father asked me to deliver it exactly 1 year after the trust was resolved. Lauren's hands trembled. For several seconds, she simply stared at it. Then she opened it. Inside was a single letter, a short one, written entirely in Robert's familiar handwriting. Lauren began reading silently. Halfway through, tears appeared. By the end, she was openly crying.
I touched her arm gently. What did he say? She laughed through tears, then handed me the letter. My vision blurred almost immediately. The first sentence alone nearly destroyed me. Dear Lauren, if you're reading this, it means you found your way back. Tears rolled down my cheeks. I continued reading. I know life may take you places I cannot follow. I know there may be mistakes, heartbreak, and difficult lessons ahead. That's part of being human. But I need you to remember something. No matter how far you wander, you will always have a place to return to. You are stronger than you think, braver than you know, and more loved than you can imagine. If you're reading this beside your mother, give her a hug for me. She'll probably need it. I laughed and cried at the same time. Classic Robert. Even from beyond the grave. The letter ended with a sentence that perfectly captured the man I had loved for 40 years. The greatest inheritance I can leave you isn't money. It's the knowledge that you never have to face life alone. Love, Dad. The room became silent. Lauren buried her face in her hands. I wrapped my arms around her, and for a moment, it felt as though Robert was somehow standing beside us, still protecting, still loving, still guiding. A year earlier, I thought the inheritance meeting was about money. I couldn't have been more wrong. The true inheritance wasn't financial. It was emotional. It was wisdom. It was protection. It was a father's final act of love. Most of all, it was a second chance. A second chance for a daughter. A second chance for a mother. A second chance for a family. And as Lauren and I walked out of that community center together, I realized something beautiful. Sometimes the people we lose continue changing our lives long after they're gone. Robert's inheritance had never been about preserving wealth. It had been about preserving family. And because of that, my daughter came home. For that gift, I will be grateful for the rest of my life. Sometimes the deepest wounds aren't caused by strangers. They come from people we trust, people we love, and people we never expected would hurt us. That is why emotional control and isolation can be so dangerous. They often happen slowly, quietly, and invisibly. This story reminds us that love should never require fear. Real love does not isolate. Real love does not manipulate. Real love does not force someone to choose between family and freedom. Healthy relationships create connection, trust, and support. It is also a reminder that family bonds can survive even painful periods of separation. Sometimes people who seem distant are carrying burdens we cannot see. Sometimes silence hides fear rather than rejection. Before assuming someone has stopped caring, it may be worth looking deeper and asking harder questions. Most importantly, never underestimate the power of having even one person who refuses to give up on you. One phone call, one visit, one act of persistence, one reminder that someone is loved. Those things can change a life. Vicki never stopped loving her daughter. Robert never stopped protecting her. And Lauren eventually found the courage to reclaim her voice. Together,
They proved that healing is possible, even after years of pain.
If this story touched your heart, let me know your thoughts in the comments.
Have you ever experienced a situation where someone tried to isolate you from people you loved? What lessons stayed with you most from this story? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who may need the reminder that they are never truly alone. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world.